Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this particular module, we are going to look at domestic violence uh, as part of the course on gender and social work. I am Dr. Shuli Kumar, Associate Professor, School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The topics to be discussed are domestic violence, the conceptual framework as a hidden malady, family as a site of violence, forms of domestic violence, the power and control wheel which explains the manifestation of domestic violence, spiral of domestic violence and its impact, model of analysis of the violence, and principles of feminist casework, and finally a summary of the module. So let's get on with trying to understand domestic violence, a manifestation perhaps which is almost as common as having a cough or a cold, because the NCRB data reflects that it is becoming very prevalent in our society. However, it remains a very hidden and invisible issue, and most of the times there is hardly any discourse on it. Domestic violence is one of the most prevalent forms of violence against women, and yet it is the most invisible, and in most societies it is taken as acceptable. So a lot of violence that happens within the privacy of the home is seen to be acceptable behavior on part of the family members towards a particular woman. DV is not recognized as a form of violence within the legal system until very recently, when the act was formulated. One of the main reasons for not recognizing domestic violence as a crime is to keep intact the sanctity of marriage and family. Unfortunately, in the name of maintaining the family honor and maintaining the privacy of the family, domestic violence was never interrogated or brought to the forefront. Numerous women did talk about facing different forms of threat and abuse and physical violence within the familial context. Yet they found that usually the other women with whom they talked about, they said, oh, it happens with me also, but that's normal in family. So it was almost normalized and more of an invisible issue, and so that the familial privacy does not get come into the open or a public space. That was where domestic violence was really not talked about. The magnitude of family-based violence or domestic violence is very difficult to measure, as not all incidences are reported and hence not counted. So even if you look at the NCRB data, it would probably give a smaller percentage of actual related incidents within families. The World Health Organization has, however, reported that the proportion of women who have ever experienced physical or sexual violence or both in an intimate partner relationship range from 15% to 71%. In that case, when the range is so varied, clearly all reportage all depends on the ways in which domestic violence is reported. So maybe in some countries the reportage is higher because the awareness that domestic violence should not happen is higher, or the legal system is available, while in some countries where the mechanisms are not in place, or domestic violence is considered to be a private matter, the reportage is very low. So in that case, the incidence and actual occurrence or prevalence rates can vary from country to country, and we wouldn't know exactly the number of women facing domestic violence, especially in India. Family is a site of violence, and that's where feminists have faced a lot of difficulty in bringing domestic violence into the public arena and having a discourse on it, and having legal frameworks and mechanisms to help women to redress and come out of such violence situations. Because family is considered sacrosanct as an institution in the Indian context, and cultural constructions are such that family is considered to be a private space, and it is linked to deep structures of patriarchy and control. Therefore, whenever violence is perpetuated within the family, it is generally pushed under the carpet, and women are told that, well, ये तुम्हारे घर का मामला है, and you need to address it within your family. So even if she goes to her natal family or talks to her natal family members, usually the woman is told that she should address it on her own, and she should not make it a public or a unnecessary problematic discussion with the family members. As a result, she is not able to access any kind of help or redress mechanism. It is also linked to the fact that families are largely heteronormative within the Indian context. So therefore, heteronormativity has to be kept in place by coercion, control, and therefore within that, women have to behave and practice the normative roles that are ascribed to them through patriarchy and the cultural constructions of gender. So any deviation from that behavior is reinforced through punishment. So for example, if a woman wants to exercise her rights to explore beyond the sexual acts that the husband may prefer, then she may be told that she is becoming sexually promiscuous within the relationship, and of course a whole lot of suspicion and abusive either verbal or physical can be implicated on her and her body. Therefore, she is not able to actually go beyond exploration even of her own sexuality within the heteronormative control that a family functions. And that is where women and men learn to enact particular roles. So a woman is supposed to be a passive and submissive actor within the familial construction, and the man is supposed to be the powerful and the decision maker within the family. So that's where family becomes a site of power, control, and domestic violence site. What is the familial context? Let's take it a little further and talk about it, because the domestic violence is deeply implicated into this kind of a context. Violence from the family, natal and marital, is also common because of the notion of honor. I have already said that the honor of the family is linked to the honor of the woman. And how is the honor of the woman actually ascribed or described? Is that she should be quiet, not so aggressive. She should be obeying the diktats of both the natal and the marital family. So she may not get a choice to decide who she gets married. She may not get a choice to say that what she wants done within the marital rituals. She may not even get a choice to call who she thinks deemed fit for her marriage. So these are some of the things that work out in a so-called arranged marriage context. And arranged marriage is also preferred because then the caste purity is kept in place. So if a woman has to decide who she wants to marry, that will not be allowed within the context of honor, because the caste purity has to be kept in mind, or religious purity has to be kept in mind. So in more and more so in this particular situation that we are in this society today, caste, religion, region, ethnicity all come together to ensure that a woman as a location, as a person who maintains the honor of the family, does not overstep the boundaries that are dictated by these social stratifiers. So in many ways the woman doesn't have too much of a voice to decide what to do within her natal or marital family in terms of choice. The other dimension that is very typical that we need to keep in mind, that even if she decides to overstep caste, or even if she decides to take a choice on her own in the familial context, sometimes she goes back into a patriarchal formation of family, even though it may be of a choice, or it may be an intercaste marriage, or it may be an interreligious marriage. Patriarchy again plays out in very different ways to implicate violence in our life. So there are instances where women have made a step forward to go into a differential caste relationship and then a marital relationship. But funnily enough, patriarchy has reared its ugly head, wherein again parents have been asked either to pay dowry or they have been asked that the daughter is too assertive, or she has had to subscribe and subordinate herself in that particular relationship to become the normalized, typical Indian woman who follows the path of patriarchy. So and then when violence is implicated on her, she again finds the same situation where she is not able to ask her natal natal family for help, because unfortunately the natal family says that you got married on your own, so you need to work it out on your own. So that's another dimension to the familial context and the honor of the family. It stays in both cases. So where is the ultimate choice? I don't think in this context it works out for the woman. There are different forms of domestic violence which we need to understand, because when we say domestic violence, we normally try and associate it with dowry related demands or bride burning. But domestic violence goes beyond that. So when we talk about domestic violence, let's bring in the contemporary issue of honor crimes and killings, where the community as the natal family acts in place of the family and does the moral policing. So in many ways, though we have formal systems of redress and complaint in form of the police or the judiciary, the community acts as the controlling agent. And as I mentioned, if the woman oversteps and wants or does get married across caste or religion or region or any other social stratifier which is considered to be followed and is rigid in structure, then the community decides to act in place of the family and ensures honor killings and subjects the women and men to violence. The other form of domestic violence is sexual harassment at workplace and public places. They continue because it is encouraged by the families and communities through silence. So if a woman comes home and says that she's being harassed by her boss and she's getting lewd SMSs and propositions from her boss or any other male member in the workplace, the family usually turns around and says that, look, let's not make too much about it. Let's not create a fuss about it. Learn to handle it now that you've made a choice to work. And these are situations which you will need to address. So this form of silencing of the woman and her discomfort and her problems, not being able to articulate her problems, makes the male perpetrator bold enough to continue the harassment, and the woman doesn't go for redress. So in our experience, whenever women have come to the sexual harassment forums to complain, it's been after a long progression of harassment that she has faced, and then finally she's not been able to take it anymore. She's never come when at the first instance of sexual harassment. So therefore women, the families and the communities are tacit in their silence and in their discouragement of women to take steps. So that is another form of domestic violence. That's how we include it in domestic violence. Then child labor, trafficking, and also child sexual abuse, wherein families play a role often by selling their children, especially their girl children, or sometimes it may be due to poverty, it may be because they don't want a girl child, or it may be because there is a dysfunctionality in the family. And so therefore we consider child labor and trafficking also coming in the manifestation of domestic violence. Often children run away from families because they are facing a lot of problems within the family, and they have violent parents or step parents, so they run away, and when they run away they are victims of trafficking. So families continue to be sites of violence in that case. There are elderly women who are deserted or they are rendered destitute because they are not wanted by their family members anymore. There are issues of property and control over property. So there are situations where elderly women are either thrown out of their households, or they are neglected by families, or they are even beaten up or physically harassed by the family members because they are either widowed or they don't have any other resources. So family members often tend to perpetuate such violence against elderly women within the family. There are also cultural constructions that once you are widowed, you can't eat particular kind of clothes or dress up in a particular manner, or have a social life of your own. So these are also forms of violence which are perpetuated against elderly women. Another form of domestic violence is child marriage, which is we consider as forced marriage, wherein children are married at a very early age, and they don't have any choices. They don't even know what's happening to them, and that's after the so-called attainment of puberty. They may be at age 14, 15 or 16. They're sent off to their marital homes, where they are used as almost bonded labor by the marital families, and they are also facing sexual harassment and sexual violence a lot of times. This is a very hidden dimension of domestic violence. Not much has been done so far in terms of interventions, despite a Child Marriage Restraint Act. So culturally, the communities perpetuate this, and yet no action is taken, because the state functions in many ways to say that they can't do anything if the families are agreeable to it. Dowry and bride price and harassment based on the same is another form of domestic violence. So is, I have already mentioned, child sexual abuse and sex selective abortion of female feticide and son preference. These are another form of domestic violence which is perpetuated against women. So let's look at the power and control wheel to understand how violence against women gets constantly replicated and regenerated in different ways and forms. The few ways in which women continue to be in domestic violence situations are that they are intimidated. There is a lot of power play within the familial context, wherein it's not just the husband but also the other members of the family who use threats like, okay, so if you will not cook in a particular way, then I'm sorry, I'm going to report to your mother and father that you are not doing the job that you should be doing. If you're not going to, if you insist on going out and meeting your friends, then we'll make sure that we'll break your leg, or we will. So there are these intimidatory tactics that is used. It may not actually be an action, but the ways in which these threats are issued, often it intimidates and makes the woman fearful of going beyond the boundary that is built by the marital home. Similarly, emotional abuse is very insidious and covert, but it impacts the self-esteem of women. So it may be that, I think you cooked the vegetable well, but if you had put a little more of salt, and you don't cook as well as, my sister-in-law, my bhabi, or my mother, which is very problematic. So I will eat this food, all right, because you made, but I won't eat it tomorrow. So there are these kind of emotional abuse that is done. Then also many such dialogues are used that, well, you don't look nice in a bindi. Why don't you take it off? You don't look very nice when you wear jewelry. Why don't you take it off? So in many ways, not allowing the woman to dress up or feel good about herself is another form of emotional abuse. These are many ways in which it is done, and it is also very culturally constructed by various stories, narratives, and myths of how women should look, how women should behave within the familial context. Using isolation is a terrifying option which is used for women. One has to remember that when women get married, they have to move from their natal home, which is maybe a safe, secure place, to a very unknown space in the marital home. And that fear in itself is never addressed or dealt with. In fact, many a time the woman is isolated by nobody talking to her, nobody interacting with her, and also making sure that most of the time she stays alone. So all the family members will go off on different social occasions and tell her that you need to stay back because you didn't cook well. You need to stay back because you didn't wash the clothes well. You need to stay back because you talked to your mother and father. You will now not get a mobile phone. You will switch off the phones that we have. You will not communicate with anyone in your family or your friends. So all coercive measures are taken to ensure that she feels completely isolated and on her own. So that's a very terrifying proposition, that you're left alone in a room without anybody to interact with for hours together. It does have a huge implication and creates a very traumatic situation for women in that relationship. It's also used in intimate partner relationship by many men to coerce the woman to do certain things which they want in terms of sexual acts or pleasing other men who they bring along with them for so-called parties and interaction. Another form is denying or minimizing, denying or blaming. So if some incidents or episode happens which is problematic for the family, for example, somebody's money is stolen, or somebody's misplaced some valuables, the whole problem is that on the one hand the woman is blamed, on the other hand if somebody is found guilty, that blame is minimized. Say, oh, it's okay, your husband, he's your husband, it's fine, he did it because he inadvertently did it, it's not his normal nature. So he doesn't normally beat up anybody, he normally does not abuse anybody. So in terms of her own experience, it is reduced to perhaps her imagination. She's told that it's her imagination and that she should kind of cope up with it. It's fine. So, making it kind of normalizing the whole violence that is perpetuated against her and telling her that she's making too much out of it. That's another way of, violating the woman. Many and a lot of times children are used saying that we'll take away your children, or that I'll beat up your boy because you're not listening to me, and you have to do. So using children as tools of perpetuating violence against the woman is another form of violence. So there are these, you control the women in many of these tactics are used together to control the woman and keep her in her space. Using male privilege is another form of control, that men need to do this and women don't do this, and in our house men don't cook, in our house men don't help women in the work, so therefore you need to do everything, and it may happen in your natal family, but out here men don't do these kind of things. So yeah, in many ways controlling the woman to behave in a particular fashion. Actually, it's a complete subordination of women that is attempted through these kind of tactics and strategies. Of course, one has talked about economic abuse, taking away all her financial possibilities by saying that, okay, now we need to know what money you have in your account. It's better to have a joint account, and you cannot withdraw without my permission, and sometimes it's our permission. You need to use only this much money within the budget, or sometimes you need to use money, you need to take money from me for everything that you need. So how economic abuse happens, that she loses her agency. She's not able to move out of the house when she feels scared, afraid, because she has no money. Sometimes even certificates are locked up so that she doesn't look for a job, and she is not able to. Sometimes certificates are also burned down by the family members so that she doesn't look for help outside. So controlling her in these kind of ways makes domestic violence very stark, very traumatic, and also creates a situation where the woman loses all the self-confidence that she may have, and also starts questioning her own self as whether she is doing the right thing or the wrong thing, or whether she should assert herself and not assert herself. Because the moment she asserts herself, any one of these strategies is used against her so that she cannot move out of that complex web of power and control. So therefore the impact on domestic violence at the individual level is of course you cannot argue upon it. It's huge. It impacts the physical health of the woman, it helps the reproductive health of the woman, as well as the mental health in terms of lack of sleep, loss of appetite, and disinterest in work and socializing. So and also the finances, because if she has any savings, there is a depletion of the savings, and she is not able to move out of that economic drudgery or situation where she is not able to ensure that she can seek help. On the one hand, she is her self-esteem is very low, so she is doubting whether she needs to go for help. On the other hand, she may have difficulties because she has no money, she has her her own physical health has deteriorated. So largely it becomes a cycle which impacts at the individual level, the woman herself and her own children also, because the children learn it in a very different way. So the familial level of impact of domestic violence is deep on the children. Children learn to normalize this kind of violence. They think that this is how adults behave and this is how we should also behave. It does have an impact on their own mental health, because violence can lead to post-traumatic difficulties for children. They may not be able to sleep, they may have episodes of bedwetting if they are very small children. They are not able to explain this scenario to their family members. And at the societal level, definitely a domestic level has a problem, because it's an issue of the nation, because there are costs to be handled where there is lost labor, women are not working, there is this problem of one person facing domestic violence going to the next person. So you have to also understand that societally violence is getting normalized. As children normalize violence, from neighborhoods normalize violence, because they say it's okay if women face violence. Larger scenarios are that violence and violent behavior gets normalized in workplaces, in state institutions, and also at larger nation community levels. So then in that case, women are not able to operate in a healthy manner at workplaces, as well as at the household level, as well as at the community levels, and perform leadership roles. So the whole development trajectory gets impacted. So what are the ways in which prevention of DV can be done? At the individual level, when we need to understand that how domestic violence is impacting in her everyday life. We need to understand at the personal level, how is it impacting in terms of familial relationships, intimate partner relationships, at the level of friendships. And so the larger ecological systems, where is it impacting, because we need to address those dimensions as well when we are working with the women. At the community context, there are various risk factors, which include the level of unemployment, the population density. So, if there are issues, there are problems at the community level, which we find in terms of unemployment, high rates of unemployment. Domestic violence increases because if the husband is not getting any job, and even the wife is not able to find a job, inside the family there are difficulties. There may be issues of finance, and then we find that the man finds an excuse to take to alcohol and subject the woman to violence. So because it's masculine to drink and beat up the wife, but it's not masculine it's not right for the wife to have alcohol and beat up the husband. So patriarchies then come into play in the community context. So and also if there is more of drug abuse and availability of drugs in the community level. As far as societal factors are concerned, we know that socio-economic policies, if they don't address gender inequalities in the context of household, community and state, the dominance of men and masculinity percolates in the cultural normative behaviors, and it essentializes and normalizes violent behavior on part of men, and then it percolates at the household level and brings it into the household level as domestic violence. Some of the principles of feminist casework which we need to use when we are working with survivors of domestic violence is individualization, recognizing that every woman has opinions, her rights are important, not only in the realm of the social roles that we play. If we need to unpack it and enable her, then as an individual woman we need to know where she is at the point of contact with the social worker, accepting whatever she says. So many of the women say that I would prefer to go back to my marital home, I just want the violent behavior to cease, and therefore accepting that as the woman's reality, not having your own expectations to say that, oh, she needs to take them to book, she needs to lodge an FIR, or she needs to ensure that they are punished. That is your expectation. So that is not right for a social worker. It's important to accept the woman as she is and what her needs are. Emotional involvement. Sometimes we have our own own realities and own experiences of such kind of situations. So it's important not to become the woman and become emotionally involved with her. You have to keep a distance in terms of the emotional involvement. Have a controlled thing, and don't let her discourse and discussion cloud your own judgment. Non-judgment, of course, that's the next step. That being non-judgmental, mental in terms of being self-reflective and reflexive, ensuring that your own judgmentality does not color the way you are addressing her problems. Respecting the woman's right to self-determination, important, because you may want her to do all kinds of things because you think that's right, but then she decides what she wants, and she decides what are the next steps that she needs to do in terms of addressing the violent situation. So significantly, that's a principle that we need to follow. The client's participation, to be able to determine what I want to do with my life as a survivor of violence. I need to also ensure that I participate in the processes. I need to take action. So how do we make a level playing ground? By using reflection and reflexivity as core principles when we are addressing the problems of a survivor of a domestic violence. And of course, most importantly, keeping all the recordings and discussions and processes absolutely confidential, guarding the name of the woman, and ensuring that nothing that she says to you or discusses with you, or nothing that is discussed in the court, if she wants to go to the court, is revealed to any other person outside the client and counselor relationship, is the key to a feminist social work practice, a feminist case work with the survivors of domestic violence. So in summation, domestic violence is a complex social issue, especially because it is considered to be a private matter. Power and control are at the center of any abusive relationship. So it's not just the violence, but the power and control that we need to address and understand. Using various techniques to exercise this results in violence. So overarchingly, using power and control creates the violent situation and coercive control and emotional abuse. There are several interventions available for domestic violence survivors, and therefore the key to it is feminist casework principles that need to be followed when we work with individual women. Empowering the women is the core process and core direction that we need to give. So if the woman feels that now I'm confident to handle the violent situation, I can assert myself and say no to violence. I can assert myself and go to the police if I want to. I can assert myself and file a case under the Domestic Violence Act. Then that is where you recognize now the woman has unlocked her agency. She has been able to recover her self-esteem. She has been able to recover her self-worth, and she is moving towards redressing and changing the violent situation. So some of the references that you may want to look at is the WHO study on multi-country study on women's health and domestic violence. You can look at Bell Hooks writings, because she has an excellent way of looking at how do you exercise agency and how do you look at dialogical processes. So the anti-oppressive processes, Bell Hooks is able to give you direction on that. And you can of course look at the reading by Ravinder Kaur and S. Agarg, addressing domestic violence against women, an unfinished agenda. And besides that, you can look at the Domestic Violence Act and many other such references which are also reflected in these readings. So thank you.